UN Covenant on Crime and Punishment for Breaching P5 UNSC World Binding Laws, Economic, Social, Cultural, Civil, Political, and Human Rights. The United Nations Permanent Five Allies from World War II delivered the 1945 UN Charter, 1948 UN Convention on the Crime and Punishment of Genocide, 1948 Declaration of Human Rights, 1960 Declaration on the Granting of Independence to Colonial Countries, and 1966 International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. These binding world laws were made post-World War II to build a better world. At this time there are grievous violators all over the world, and many are in full colonial mode. The UNSCP-5 fund 59% of the peacekeeping missions around the world. China won protection for civilians in armed conflict 1998. Russia in 1960 saved thousands of minority women through the abolishment of enfranchisement. Russia led the charge on ending colonialism. France authored the Declaration of Human Rights 1948. France cemented the rights of the working class citizen. USA cemented the people, liberty, universal suffrage, and with UK rolled out the Quakers. UK pushed to feed the world, and in 1998 the P5 created the International Criminal Court. This convention is to celebrate the P5, and at the same time address the violators of international law through ICC empowerment, criminal, and financial liability. Article 1. International Criminal Court empowerment must occur when UN General Assembly states are found to have gross violations of the UN Charter, the crime of genocide, children's atrocities, gross violations of economic, social, cultural, civil, and political rights. Further, the General Assembly states who vote on this convention understand that nations who have not ended colonialism, amended their constitution, and have in fact refused to educate their citizens must relinquish investigative rights to the ICC with a vote from the UNSC, United Nations Security Council. In such cases the member state will be held financially liable for all ICC costs. Costs associated with any and all investigations will be reimbursed by the convicted party/parties 100%, and all monies retrieved above that will be made payable to the victims. In cases where the UN member state has signed binding world laws and failed to adopt any, or all world binding law articles since the reasonable time period established, a UN state government can be prosecuted by the ICC indefinitely without a statute of limitations. Article 2. Article 2. Indigenous persons defined as people who are/were of first origin of a UN state, and are subject to absolute decolonization, as well as the law of sovereignty, self-determination, and self-government, must be settled within 12 months of all Union states who become signatory to this covenant on the day of signing. All protocols of world-binding laws listed in this introduction must be utilized by the P5, indigenous, and state citizens until constitutionalism has been codified by the citizens and indigenous peoples of the UN state together. Colonials, colonizers, and governments in crown colonial architecture, who are replacing domestic populations in violation of world-binding laws, are to be made liable financially and criminally by way of the UNSC and the ICC, whichever option is chosen by all P5. Domestic populations can't be violated as indigenous populations were. Indigenous governments established must not follow the colonizers' breaches. Full adherence to the world-binding laws must be educated to the indigenous populations and the UN state citizens. At no time can the UN state or its territories be torn apart or state sovereignty be usurped. All the people of the state must enter into constitutional dismemberment, design and redesign, and the P5 will finalize the terms agreed to by the parties, UN citizens of the UN state. Article 3. Education is a parental right. No UN state shall arbitrarily remove the family unit as a fundamental unit of society. Children who have been forcefully removed by a UN state, federal government, or regional government by armed force, legislation, or by a third party employed by a federal/regional government shall be made whole through criminal and financial justice. This justice must be decided by the UNSC, or ICC, whichever is voted forward by all the P5. Article 4. Health, welfare and social programs must be equal for all citizens of a UN state. Colonial models differentiating and segregating any peoples on health, welfare, and social programs including indigenous must be within 12 months be assessed by the economic and social organ of the UN. Detailed reports on violations of any peoples in binding world laws must be turned over to the UNSC annually and paid for by the UN state in violation. The offenders will suffer financial liquidation to repay all parties, including the UN state citizens and victims. The UNSC shall vote on the binding remedy or turn over the results to the ICC. The P5 shall decide which course of action to take. Article 5. Economic hardship of any UN state citizens, including indigenous, due to class structure, colonial systems, and by the UN state government violating binding world laws must be assessed according to the historic UN state's average standard of living, unemployment rate, education level, land access and cost of living. Access to food, water, resources, land fertility and development will also be measured. All reports must be completed by the social and economic organ of the UN. These reports must be done annually and the UNSC and ICC can arbitrarily seek financial compensation by the UN state violator. The P5 can impose sanctions, embargoes, military intervention, and arrest of perpetrators should results show a gross violation of any people's under human rights binding world laws. The P5 can also impose constitutional amendments or redesign where needed as per binding world laws. Article 6. National languages in former and current colonial states whom did not get legal independence from colonials, colonizers, or the colonizers must protect, nurture and foster all indigenous peoples' languages to the same level as the national languages. A detailed report on progress will be submitted to the UNSC every 12 months by all colonial states with indigenous populations. A list of indigenous leaders in all languages and cultures will be provided for contact and confirmation to the UNSC. Any false reporting will be subject to the UNSC or the ICC. The P5 will determine. All financial costs will be assumed by the violating UN state. Criminal prosecution to follow with the violators. Article 7. Education and culture are one and the same. No indigenous persons can be deprived of their culture. Education measured by the UN state's education system will be made available to the indigenous populations. If economically the indigenous populations are not able to meet the conditions of the colonial UN state systems, a land settlement must be reached. Resources must be turned over to the indigenous population's direct control. Article 8. UN states must not divide peoples into race, class, religion or sex. Under this covenant, all state parties agree that colonialism is outlawed because of the Great Colonial Wars I and II. The P5, Russia, USA, China, France and UK are to end all current violators of international binding laws. No state can name Russia, USA, France, UK or China in their defense of colonial acts outlawed today. Today, on the anniversary of August 15, 1945, the victorious Allies undertook a great service to the peoples of this world. They strove to correct the many wrongs of the past. They strove to ensure that all peoples of the world were released from the tyranny of colonialism. The remaining Allies had great success in working toward this goal. Many colonial countries agreed and were bound by signing the United Nations agreements. All made promises to follow through with the signings and many did. Some did not and continue to run their countries in the old colonials' way. They did not follow through on their promise. They did not release their people from the tyranny of colonial rule. The remaining Allies created rights for the people of this world that are still ignored to this day by some governments. These countries continue to treat their peoples as serfs or enact colonial genocide. It is time again for the 5 victorious Allies to again take action. It is time again to reiterate to these colonial leaders that they must follow through with the promises they made. It is time again for the Allies to hold them accountable for the lack of action on the promises made by past leaders. Recognizing that the people under colonialism are again asking for assistance, and for the United Nations guaranteed rights granted to the world, that this resolution must be passed by UN state majority. With great power comes great responsibility. The United Nations was created to bring peace and security to our world. The P5 members, China, Russia, UK, USA and France, have shown the world that they take their role and their responsibilities very seriously. Through this resolution, we reaffirm the many great achievements the P5 members have accomplished. They continue to exemplify what is possible when we truly work together while respecting each other's differences. To be presented in UNSC August 16, 2021, on the day after absolute surrender of colonialism 76 years ago. * adoption date to be determined by the sponsoring P5 nations.